දවස් 30ක්ම unlimited Netflix බලන්න. Unlimited data pack එකක් මුළු පවුලටම unlimited fun එකක් අරගන්න. අදම active කරගන්න.
ලෙන්ගතුකම වැඩි කරගන්න ලව්ජු රුපියල් 50ට අඩු කළා.
මාමේ එන්න අපිට එකක් බොමු.
Tonight, still on track. The curfew in the Western Province is set to be lifted on Monday, despite the 30th COVID-19 death being confirmed. The GMOA also backs the move. Fears allayed. The epidemiology chief explains the change in COVID-19 treatment policy.
Global evidence and the medical experiences, we can see that asymptomatic people need not to undergo PCR testing.
Mass detection. The rapid antigen test isn't sensitive as PCR.
Antigen testing is very good for the mass scale identification of the infected people.
Update. New set of guidelines issued on home quarantine process. All that and much more coming up on First at 9. This Saturday, the 7th of November, 2020.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9.
Nava sunlight sakura. Then Dikukal pavathina sakura mal suandin.
Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to First at 9. I'm Dhamke Kanaka. Now, the chief of the epidemiology unit, Dr. Sudat Samaravira, today gave a thorough elaboration on the quarantine process, testing and the treatment policies of the government with regards to COVID-19, intending to alleviate any possible doubts fostered by the people. Touching on concerns over discharging asymptomatic COVID-19 patients without conducting PCR tests, Dr. Samaravira said that the treatment process is based on medical evidence from both locally and abroad, insisting that the infected cannot transmit the virus after 14 days.
At the moment, there is a confusion about the quarantining practice in our country among some people. It should be clarified. Earlier, all the people who are first contacts of a COVID-19 patient were admitted to a quarantine center and were monitored for 2 weeks at that place. But now this has changed that the people are quarantining at their own residences. And previously, at the beginning of the quarantining, some people were undergone PCR testing depending on their risk of exposure, and towards the end of the quarantine period, all the people's PCR has been done and we have identified whether they are infected or not. Only if they are not infected that they were released to homes to be followed with self-quarantining for another 2 weeks. But now all the people are quarantining at their home, and if a person is unable to quarantine at their home because of the social conditions or medical conditions, then they will be quarantined at an institution.
Chief epidemiologist Dr. Sudat Samaravira also insists that the testing policy in relation to COVID-19 has not changed.
The testing policy has not been changed. At the beginning of the quarantine, if the person is at a higher risk of exposure, they will be subjected to the PCR testing. If they are negative, they will be continuing the quarantine for 2 weeks. Towards the end of the 2 weeks, we will be doing another PCR testing to identify, to detect whether these people are infected or not. If they are infected, they will be admitted to a hospital or intermediate treatment center. If they are not infected, then the quarantine period will be completed. Whether they are quarantining at an institution or home, it doesn't matter. Doing a PCR at the end of the 2 weeks, it will be continuing as usual.
Dr. Samaravira added that the country's COVID-19 treatment policy, however, has changed based on evidence from within the country and across the globe.
The treatment policy has been changed recently. Earlier, before they are discharged, after 2 weeks in hospital, we were doing 2 PCR testing, and then if they are negative only, that they were discharged. But with the global evidence and the medical experiences, as well as in our country experience, that we can see that for the asymptomatic people who are not showing any disease condition or signs and symptoms, these people need not to undergo PCR testing. If they continue to be without symptoms for 2 weeks, that means at the end of the 2 weeks, these people will not infect other people. So because of that, doing a PCR test or 2 tests is useless. So because of that, the government has taken a decision to discharge all the asymptomatic patients after 2 weeks if their symptoms free throughout the period without doing a PCR. But after they are discharging, they have to be self-quarantined at their own residence for another 2 weeks. This ensures that they will not transmit the disease to other people.
He also touched on the cricket tournament, the Lankan Premier League, which received the all clear from the government, stressing that measures are put in place to ensure that those arriving from abroad do not mix with the local communities.
And also that the government has given clearance to continue the Premier League cricket tournaments here, and that it is doing in a way that the players and the other people who are coming abroad will be quarantined here for a limited period, but with a secure manner that they will not transmit the disease to our community. So that what you call it biosecure bubble, that is people that coming together will be staying together until that they complete the tournament, and during that period from time to time PCR testing will be done, and also will take the maximum precautions that they will not mix in with the other people in the community, so that risk of spreading the disease from these people if they are infected is prevented maximally. And also the people has to watch the matches from their own home. They are not allowed to come to the stadiums.
Safeguard hand sanitizer. Navatama nishpadana pela neerogimat diviyakata.
The Government Medical Officers Association also seems to back the government's plan to lift the curfew imposed on the Western Province, but insist that the movement in COVID-19 risk areas must be restricted. It also calls to attention the number of people who perished to the virus within the jurisdiction of the Colombo Municipal Council since the second wave came to be. Sri Lanka has lost 30 of its citizens to the coronavirus, with the latest being a 23-year-old suffering from diabetes.
A 23-year-old infected with COVID-19 had passed away at the National Institute of Infectious Diseases on Thursday, the 5th. The Department of Government Information confirmed yesterday that the victim from the area of Modara had been a diabetic. His death marks Sri Lanka's 30th COVID-19 death and the 17th since the second wave of the coronavirus came into being in early October. The final rites of the deceased was performed last evening at the Kolonnawa Public Cemetery.
මේ බෝ නොවන රෝග වයස්ගත වූවන්ට තිබුණත් තරුණයට තිබුණත් අවදානම් වැඩි කියන එක මේ මරණ හරහා අපිට පේනවා. දැන් කොළඹ මහනගර සභා සීමාව ඇතුලේ මේ විදිහට මරණ විශාල ප්‍රමාණයක් මේ දවස් කිහිපයක් තුල වාර්තා වීම බොහොම අපේ අවධානයට ලක් විය යුතු කාරණයක්. අපි විශ්වාස කරන්නේ නැහැ සමස්ත බස්නාහිර පළාතේම ඇඳිරි නීතිය පැවැත්විය යුතුයි කිය. ඒ නිසා විශේෂයෙන් බස්නාහිර පළාතේ අවදානම් ප්‍රදේශ තෝරගෙන ඒ ප්‍රදේශවල සංචරණ සීමා පැනවෙන ක්‍රමවේදයක් සකස් කරලා තමයි ඇඳිරි නීතිය ඉවත් විය යුත්තේ කියලා අපි විශ්වාස කරනවා. ඒ ප්‍රදේශات අපි හරි අධ්‍යයනයකින් තොරව විවෘත වුණොත් එහෙම ඒ හරහා අපිට රට පුරා නැවතත් රෝගය ව්‍යාප්ත වීමේ තර්ජනයකට ලක් වෙන්න පුළුවන්.
In a separate development, Easter Sunday attacks ringleader Zahran Hashim's wife has also contracted the COVID-19. A spokesperson from the Department of Prisons confirmed the matter today, and 25-year-old Fatima Hadia is sent for treatment at the Valikanda Special Treatment Centre in Polonnaruwa under special security. A PCR test has confirmed her infection. What's more, 7 inmates who were quarantined at the Old Bogambara prison have also tested positive for COVID-19. A spokesperson of the Department of Prisons said that they too are hospitalized. Meanwhile, total of 300 PCR tests were conducted pertaining to the Valikada prison yesterday. All the results, however, have returned negative. The number of coronavirus infections at the Lady Ridgeway Children's Hospital has been on the up, with most among the infected being patients. It is now confirmed that a nurse at the hospital too has contracted COVID-19, with a hospital spokesperson saying the infected nurse had served at the same ward as the doctor who tested positive recently. With that being the case, all the patients and the staff at the ward in question were subjected to PCR tests. In another unusual twist, a person who underwent a surgical procedure at the Homagama Base Hospital too is infected with COVID-19. Medical Superintendent at the hospital, Janitha Hettiarachchi, said that the patient had to be operated on since he had suffered a stabbing whilst being under the influence of alcohol. 10 members of the hospital staff, including the doctors who treated the patient, are sent for quarantine. What's more, the hospital administration has decided to temporarily close the intensive care unit and the surgical operation theatre. In the meantime, 4 persons who had served at the Palliagoda Fish Market office who are infected with COVID-19 were found from Min area last night. The 4 persons in question had undergone PCR tests in the area of Modara in Colombo recently and had travelled to the area of Min area in a vehicle belonging to the Ceylon Fisheries Corporation without notification. They had taken lodgings at a circuit bungalow of the Ceylon Fisheries Corporation and were located by the health authorities following complaints from the area residents. The 4 infected persons were hospitalized while the rest were quarantined. Health authorities say that investigations are underway to trace the others who had come into contact with the errant foe. Meanwhile, 7 more persons from the area of Muskelia have contracted the virus, including a 4-month-old infant.
ඇතෙම මේකේ මූලාශ්‍රය වෙන්නේ මුලින්ම බ්‍රවුන්ලෝ වත්තට ආවා පැලියගොඩ ෆිෂ් මාකට් එකේ කෙනෙක්. එතන තිබිලා තියෙනවා අවමගුලක් සිද්ධ වෙලා දවස් 16කින් තියෙන යම්කිසි උත්සවයක්. ඒකට සහභාගී වෙච්ච කට්ටිය තමයි මේ ඔක්කොම දිගින් දිගටම පැතිරගෙන යන්නේ.
In Galaha, a 14-year-old who was under quarantine in the area of Peravatta is also confirmed with the virus. Health authorities say that he is an associate of the 16-year-old student who contracted COVID-19 earlier. As time went on, the number of infections at the apparel factory in Gurugoda of Horana continued to rise, and it has been confirmed that a further 81 infections are confirmed there. Administrative Public Health Inspector of Horana PC Senaratna said that 159 COVID-19 infections have been confirmed from the factory thus far. In the meantime, another 5 persons from the Valisara Economic Centre have tested positive for the virus. Its manager said that a further 140 PCR results are due in the coming day. In Dehi Obita, another 6 infections were confirmed yesterday within its MOH division. In Ambalangoda, 5 family members from a virus-infected person from the area of Tilakpura were also confirmed with COVID-19 yesterday. Among them are his spouse and 3 children aged 5, 6 and 11. In another development, an illegal quarantine centre in the area of Hunupitiya in Kalaniya was raided by public health inspectors today. Our correspondent said that 2 persons there had contracted COVID-19. The people there were directed for quarantine at the same venue, and those who operated the facility came under sharp rebuke by the health authorities. Meanwhile, taking yesterday into consideration, the number of fresh infections added to the overall tally is 400. 203 of them are from the Gampar district, which is over half of the infections. From the rest, 103 are from the Colombo district, 18 are from Kegol, 17 are from Kurunagala, 13 are from Kalutara with 3 from Gol. Furthermore, 2 infections each are confirmed from the districts of Badulla and Ratnapura, while the districts of Kandy, Matale, Nuwara, Ampara, Matara, Hambantota, Vaunia, Anuradhapura, Polonnaruwa and Monaragala recorded a single infection each. Among yesterday's infections are 6 police officers and 23 inmates. That puts the number of COVID-19 cases stemming from the Minuwangoda and Palliagoda clusters at 9,753. From that number, 7,705 are associates of the initially infected patients. 3,762 from the 2 clusters, however, have fully recovered from the virus. As things stand, the overall number of COVID-19 cases Sri Lanka has recorded since the virus was first detected in the country towards the beginning of the year is 13,227. From that figure, 5,474 are still under treatment, placing the number of complete recoveries at 7,723. With yesterday's COVID-19 death, the island has lost 30 of its citizens to the virus so far.
Now in news, just in 4 more COVID-19 deaths were just confirmed, with 3 women and a man being among them. Now this brings Sri Lanka's COVID-19 death toll to 34. And let me repeat that news for you. 4 more COVID-19 deaths are confirmed within the day, which brings Sri Lanka's COVID-19 death toll to 34. It is also said that 3 women and a man are among the dead. Now moving on with other news, at a time when Sri Lanka is planning to go ahead with the rapid antigen testing, media spokesperson of the Ministry of Health, Dr. Jayaruwan Bandara says that the test aids to detect mass number of COVID-19 infections than the PCR test. But there is a catch. He says that the antigen test is less sensitive than the PCR test.
Out of these 30 deaths, 17 has been reported within very short time, or 6 deaths reported during last 2 days. That's a remarkable number. And out of all 17 deaths, we identified 3 are younger people and other 14 are older people. Those older people has been at their houses without coming to the society. Then how those older people has got this disease? That is with the contamination of their systems from the people who brought that infection into their houses. So that is where the risk is. When you go out of your own house for your day-to-day work, you have to be so careful not to bring that COVID-19 infection into your house. Ministry of Health has introduced the antigen testing. The difference is the PCR test takes some time, 6 hours to 8 hours, maybe 12 hours. But the sensitivity of PCR is more than 70%. The scientists say the sensitivity of the antigen testing is lesser than that, but it's very good for the mass scale identification of the infected people.
We will see you on the other side of this break. Stay tuned.
Ceylon Bank, the bank with a heart.
Welcome back. You're watching First at 9. Now, the Ministry of Health has issued a series of new guidelines to be strictly adhered to by people who are placed under home quarantine. A decision was made recently to home quarantine family members and close contacts of COVID-19 infected people with the overcrowding of quarantine facilities. The ministry has also put in place a mechanism to actively monitor the home quarantine process.
People who have come into contact with a COVID-19 patient or suspected to have been, but do not display symptoms and are confined to their homes, are the people identified as home quarantined. A person must be home quarantined for at least 14 days from the last day when that person is suspected to have been in contact with an infected patient. If you are a person who has resorted to home quarantine, here are some steps you should follow for the well-being of both yourself and the general public. During the period of quarantine, you should not leave your house or allow outsiders to enter the house. It is important that the person suspected to coming into contact with an infected patient being allocated a separate room with adequate ventilation and ensure that separate sanitary facilities are provided. In cases where it is difficult to do so, it is mandatory to clean the taps and other equipment as well as door handles, etc. with soap or detergent after use. Always assign separate beddings, towels, dishes and cutlery for the quarantined person, and it is essential to wash these utensils with soap. When meeting family members at home, wear face masks and try to maintain a distance of 1 meter from each other. Avoid touching the face, mouth, nose and eyes with unclean hands and wash them thoroughly with soap for at least 20 seconds. If possible, take the body temperature of every person in the house at least twice a day. People with geriatric or chronic diseases should be kept away as much as possible, and it is important that they take due medication. Dispose used tissue papers and disposable face masks in a garbage bin with a lid. It is vital that the suspected patients remain in a relaxed state of mind and should follow a nutritious regular diet. They must also drink 2.5 liters of water daily. If you are exhibiting any symptoms such as fever, cough, cold, shortness of breath, sore throat and body aches, you should immediately inform the area medical officer or the public health inspector.
Senior DIG of the Western Province, Deshabandhu Tennakon, today reassured that the curfew imposed of the Western Province will be lifted on Monday the 9th of November as planned. As such, he urged the public to act responsibly, adhering to the health and safety guidelines that have been issued by the Ministry of Health in order to curb the further spread of COVID-19.
Senior DIG of the Western Province, Deshabandhu Tennakon, said today that action will be taken to lift the curfew in the Western Province on Monday the 9th of November as planned.
අනිවාර්යයෙන්ම සිදු වෙනවා. ඉතින් ඊටාම වක්කීමෙන් යුතුව සෑම කෙනෙක්ම කටයුතු කළ යුතුයි. මේ නිරෝධායන ක්‍රියාවලිය එක්පසකින් ක්‍රියාත්මක වෙද්දී සමාජය තුළ මේ වෛරසය ව්‍යාප්ත නොවන ලෙස කටයුතු කරන්න අවශ්‍ය කරන මුඛ ආවරණ පළඳින්න, ඒ වගේම හැකිතාක් දුර සමාජ දුරස්ථභාව රඳව ගන්න, ඒ වගේම සමාජයේ පුද්ගල ඒකරාශී වීම අවම කරගන්න, ඒ වගේම සෞඛ්‍ය අමාත්‍යාංශය විසින් නිකුත් කරලා තියෙන අලුත්ම මාර්ගෝපදේශකයන් අනුව උපදෙස් 52ක් ඊයේ දවසේ නිකුත් කරලා තිනවා. ඒකට අනුව සමාජ කටයුතු සංවිධානය කිරීම, අවමංගල්‍ය උත්සව පැවැත්වීම, මංගල්‍ය උත්සව පැවැත්වීම, ඒ වගේම නොයෙකුත් ව්‍යාපාර ආයතන පවත්වාගෙන යුතු ආකාරය සම්බන්ධයෙන් ඉතා පැහැදිලි උපදෙස් මාලාවක් දීලා තිනවා. අපි ඒ සම්බන්ධව අද වෙද්දී පොලිසිය මාර්ගයෙන් ඒ ප්‍රදේශවාසීන් දැනුවත් කිරීම කරන්න ආරම්භ කරලා තිනවා. ඒ නිසා සෑම කෙනෙක් මේ මාර්ගෝපදේශ වලට යටත්ව ජීවත් වුණොත් එහෙම අපිට ඉතා කෙටි කාලයකින් පුළුවන් වෙනවා අපේ සමාජයෙන් මේ වෛරසය දුරු කරගන්න.
වර්තමානයේ තියෙන පවතින තත්ත්වයක් එක්ක අපිට නැවත වතාවක් රට වහලා නැවත වතාවක් මොනවා හරි පොකුරක් ආවොත් නැවත වතාවක් ආයෙ රට වහන්න වෙනවා. දැන් මේ කොවිඩ් අවදානමත් එක්ක ජීවත් වීමේ හැකියාව අපි ඇති කරගන්නට ඕනේ. රට වහපුවාම රාජ්‍ය නිලධාරීන් හැටියට අපිට වැටුපක් හම්බ වෙනවා. ඒක හරි. නමුත් අහිංසක දෛනිකව ආදායමක් හොයන පිරිස, ඒ වගේම කුඩා කර්මාන්ත කරගෙන යන පිරිස නැවත මේ කර්මාන්ත වැහුනොත් නැවත මේ කර්මාන්ත ආරම්භ කරන්න තරම් මූලික ප්‍රාග්ධනයක් හොයාගන්න ඒගොල්ලන්ට පුළුවන් කමක් නැහැ. ඒ නිසා අපි රජයක් හැටියට තෝරාගත් ප්‍රදේශ පමණක් නිරෝධායනයට ලක් කරලා අපි ඉදිරි ප්‍රදේශ අපි ජනතාවගේ දෛනික කටයුතු වලට විවෘත කරන්න තමයි රජයක් හැටියට අපේ බලාපොරොත්තුව තියෙන්නේ.
In another development, the Manning market, which was temporarily closed on the 22nd of October after the detection of COVID-19 infections, will reopen on Monday the 9th of November. In the meantime, farmers at the Damul Economic Centre say that the vegetable prices are falling sharply due to the lack of vendors at the premises. It was also observed how the produce which was transported to other economic centres had returned and are stocked in piles. In contrast, however, the prices of some essential goods, including vegetables, at the Bokundara Economic Centre had risen today. In the meantime, police media spokesperson DIG Ajit Rohana said that the list of institutions, corporations and offices whose employees do not need curfew passes to travel during the curfew was updated. Accordingly, security guards of private firms will be able to use their office ID, while persons delivering goods to economic centres must produce a letter from the manager at the economic centre. Meanwhile, with the fishmonger at the Hatton Fish Market testing positive for the virus, measures were taken to disinfect the premises yesterday. However, employees at the Hatton Dikkoy Municipal Council, who had taken up the task to disinfect the premises, had stolen 37,000 rupees and a stock of goods worth 5,000 rupees from the fish market. Employees of the shop who returned from quarantine had found CCTV footage of the theft. As such, the Hatton police arrested 4 suspects today. In the meantime, new commander of the Air Force Air Vice Marshal Sudarshana Patirana said today that a program is launched to map the areas where COVID-19 infections are confirmed.
ජනාධිපතිතුමා විශේෂ අවධානයක් යොමු කළා. මම හිතන්නේ දැනට සුමාන දෙක තුනකට ඉස්සෙල්ලාම උපදෙස් දුන්නා කොරෝනා ව්‍යාප්තිය පිළිබඳ සිතියම් ගත කරන්න කියලා. ඒ වගේම අපි සිතියම් විතරක් නෙමෙයි යුද හමුදාව සහ වෙන අනිකුත් සියලුම ආයතන එකතු වෙලා දැනටමත් ඒ සිතියම් ගත කිරීම ආරම්භ කළා. ඊටාම මම හිතන්නේ ඊටාම හොඳ සිතියම් ගත කිරීමකට ලක් කරලා තියෙන්නේ.
Now, Sri Lanka is cracking down on irregular migration of women domestic workers to Oman. The Foreign Ministry says that the Embassy of Sri Lanka in the Sultanate of Oman has introduced a new procedure in coordination with the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment and the Omani authorities concerned to curb irregular migration of Sri Lankan women domestic workers into Oman. According to the new procedure, Directorate General of Passports and Residence of Royal Oman Police will issue employment visa to Sri Lankan women domestic workers only if the recruitment agencies or individual sponsors submit the no objection certificate issued by the Embassy of Sri Lanka in Muscat together with the employment contract of each Sri Lankan woman domestic worker. Therefore, the recruitment agencies and individual sponsors are mandated to obtain a no objection certificate from the Embassy of Sri Lanka in Muscat to recruit Sri Lankan women domestic workers into the Sultanate of Oman. We will see you shortly. Stay with us. Welcome back. This is First at 9. Now, the remittance flow to Sri Lanka is projected to decline by 9% this year due to the economic crisis induced by the COVID-19 pandemic and shutdown. The World Bank says this in a recent report titled Phase 2 COVID-19 Crisis Through a Migration Lens. It says that the coronavirus-related global slowdown and travel restrictions will also affect migratory movements, and this is likely to keep remittances subdued even next year. In the report, the World Bank goes on to warn that not only Sri Lanka but all the countries around the world will be hit by the deceleration in remittances. Remittances to South Asia are projected to suffer a protracted decline of around 4% in 2020 and 11% in 2021. The report notes that the deceleration in remittances to the South Asian region is driven by the prolonged global economic slowdown due to the coronavirus outbreak. What's more, given that the pandemic is likely to persist through 2021, the earlier anticipated V-shaped recovery now seems implausible, adding that this is likely to directly affect remittance outflows from the United States, the United Kingdom, and the GCC and EU countries to South Asia. Remittance flows to low and middle income countries are projected to fall by 7.2% to $508 billion in 2020, followed by a further decline of 7.5% to $470 billion in 2021. The World Bank says that the foremost factors driving the decline of remittances include weak economic growth and employment levels in migrant hosting countries, weak oil prices, and depreciation of the currencies of remittance source countries against the US dollar. And that's it from all of us here at First at 9. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.